And is it fair for me as an outsider, reading Mission Local and just observing, the same thing happened in both cases? Is that true? Meaning both cases, MacArthur and Crankstart. The DA Jenkins wasn't interested in. There was a little bit of law and order, and was not a goal to reduce the number of people, in prison, explicitly in the MacArthur case. But sounds like Crankstart kind of wanted to keep people out of prison too, or at least knew that would be an effect if their program was being successful. Need there be any distinction drawn between the two, or was it the same thing happening twice?
Very similar. I'd say very similar thing happened twice. And the wrinkle I'd add is that, as was the case under Boudin as well, reportedly, it is there has also been some mismanagement within Jenkins' office. So while it is also the case that some of these grants just didn't have people, who are administering them and doing the kind of steps that you need to push it along. So it was both a kind of lack of interest explicitly and ideologically, and also just a failure administratively to push forward the grants that, $3 million is $3 million, and they could have used that money to experiment. But yes, it's both things.
Yeah. Did the accusations of mismanagement, were there any accusations of mismanagement that preceded the letter, the public sort of dust up, or did they all come later? Is this a rebuttal that we would hear, or was it an issue at the time?
It's been an issue. Dozens of staffers have left the office, and while certainly many of those were for ideological reasons, and you have a new DA, it's very common to have a changing of the guard. A lot of folks just said that things are just not working as well anymore. But again, they said the same often during Boudin. So you've got a couple DAs now who, maybe because of their ideological leanings, are also, as we're seeing at the federal level, doing away with or having an effect on career officials and career staff that maybe are not so political and are just keeping the office running.
Yeah. And then just one more relationship with a funder between the office, and in this case, I do mean, as led by Jenkins. The California Victim Compensation Board also, yanked funding, or the DA's office lost out, I guess I'll say, on some funding that everybody thought it would have, should have, could have gotten.
Yes.
How did that happen?
So this was a particular one because this speaks more to the mismanagement and the kind of lack of just pushing forward paperwork. Jenkins campaigned, as many kind of more centrist or tough on crime folks campaign, on victim services. So that is, we're emphasizing victims of crime here and making sure victims of crime get can feel supported with our office. And California has an entire victim services board at the state level that gives you remuneration and will actually pay for some things, if you've been a victim of crime. But that requires the DA's office to be in touch and to put folks in touch with the funding at the top. And this state agency gives funding to DAs across the state to do this, to implement a victim services division within their offices. And so, because of what we've heard is just kind of ordinary, lack of getting the approvals and lack of communicating with the state at the right time, they lost out for a few weeks on this funding and they had no victim services for those few weeks and they got it back, but they had to, it's kind of an embarrassing thing. It's kind of something that everyone told us should be on automatic and is just, requires filling this out and getting approvals and then sending it to the state. And so you have this irony of a DA who campaigned on victim services, not really paying attention and having her eye on the ball when it comes to actually implementing remuneration for victim services. And it wasn't just the loss of funding. Folks have told us that the unit itself has suffered dearly and that people have been leaving and that the kind of services that were, again, routine under previous DAs are just not being done anymore.
Hmm. I mean, the article you wrote did say Boudin was losing staffers in that, though not as many as Jenkins, I understand. But okay, all right.
Absolutely. It's not just Jenkins. I mean, this is kind of what I went to earlier was that now two offices in a row are seeing kind of large shifts in their staffing. And again, from very different ideological perspectives, but you kind of have this effect on the ordinary capacity of the office.
Mhm. So then let me ask either two unfair questions or one unfair one and one you might not want to answer. But how would it be possible to characterize the sort of street level or resident level attitude towards private money coming in, the aims of which are in tension with the democratically elected office holder? Were these particular foundations at issue in any campaign, or would there be a furrowing of the eyebrow? Clearly, the DA thought that there's no cost for her in sending a letter with that kind of language. But what would be the public perception, if it's even possible to determine or describe, of this philanthropic support that seemed to run up against democratically elected policymakers' different aims?
I'm not sure the general public has much of a view on the philanthropy here. I mean, I think if anything, people would be surprised to even learn that foundations support a government agency. I mean, even I was a little surprised at the amounts, that they support particular programs and that they do have a say in, or at least because of the funding can have an influence in how those government programs are run. That would be a surprise in and of itself. I think more than anything, you're right that the Jenkins' response to it is what might have an impact, which is that yes, she will have support from folks here because of her tough response and because of, her saying, we're not kowtowing to these out of town or at least outsider foundations. We know how to do public safety, and we're going to continue to do what we were elected to do, which is to kind of take a tougher and approach on crime. And, kind of, people are tired of chaos on the streets and tired of repeat offenders, being released by lenient judges is a big line of hers. And, any foundation grants that try to move us in an opposite direction, we're just, not going to do anymore. So I think less than the philanthropy itself, there was a very clear avenue for a response that said, you know what, if the foundation money, even if it's a few $1 million, is against what we were elected to do, then we'll forego it.
Mm-hmm. And then if you can offer an opinion as a reporter or an editor or both, there's a lot of money in San Francisco. Is what happened in these, I'll say two instances, thinking of the two philanthropic ones as opposed to the third adding the state support. Uh, I mean, is that might you think, do you think that philanthropic supporters of policy-oriented activities that include the state are going to maybe hold off a little bit, or at least not have as long of a grant term, when your idea, your mission, your aim could be rejected? I mean, what does this say about the future of philanthropic support in San Francisco, where there's a lot of money for public projects, really?
I mean, I think that yes, if foundations and philanthropic individuals generally hadn't thought about the fact that offices are headed by elected officials, and then those elected officials might change. They certainly would more now, but I do think this is a bit particular to the DA. I mean, I'd say the DA's office has had one of the biggest shifts in terms of ideology, and so in a sense, it's not so surprising that old grants that emphasized kind of reform were rejected by the new DA. I mean, I think in most cases, you're funding the Department of Environment, or something that is probably going to be more stable, and your funding is probably not going to change that much year over year, administration to administration. I'm not sure how big the effect will be generally on philanthropy and government here in San Francisco. I think particularly, yeah, I could see criminal justice reform funding, seeking other lead agencies than the DA's office in the coming years. But that should have been obvious from the recall from 2022.
Yeah, yeah. Anything I did not ask Joe that you think might be relevant or worth offering?
No, again, I think the most surprising thing for a lot of folks was just the fact that foundations do have this level of support for an individual, for a government department, government agency. I think there's more work to be done by us and other local media on, well, how much of a city's budget is foundation supported, private supported? Another thing, actually, we just did a different story on an internal city report here in San Francisco that found that over 3 years, the city failed to use some $50 million of all kinds of grants, so federal, state, and private grants. But that was not for ideological reasons. That was just because they're sometimes don't do the job of pushing it along, and they don't hire someone to administer the grant, and then they end up losing funding. I mean, I think if anything, this kind of shows you that the way government is funded at a local level is Byzantine and made up of all kinds of, you're aggregating things from 1,000 different sources. And sometimes that means that this one private foundation, has X requirements and you just don't want to meet them, and or you can't meet them because you didn't hire the right staff person. And that means a few $1 million goes away. I mean, I think it shines a light on how our governments are actually funded, which is, piecemeal, which is surprising to folks.
Yeah. And with all this grant money floating around, taxes must be going down.
You would hope. I think
Yeah.
that's news to people, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if it's okay, why don't we end it there, Joe? After I thank you for doing this with us today. Thanks so much.
great. Thank you.